Hey everyone, geophysicist Stefan Burns here. Space weather is beginning to ramp up in a big way, and I expect that to continue for the next couple weeks or so, going all the way till the end of June, due to a variety of factors. First and foremost, there is a very active region just now rotating into view, but on the far side of the sun for the past few days, it has been spitting fire, basically ejecting plasma nonstop out into interplanetary space, actually shooting that directly towards Mars. And we have critical planetary geometry coming up on June 21st, but in reality, a few days before that, and in fact, actually going all the way till about the end of June. So Mars is going to be charged up with plasma, enter into alignment with Mercury, then Earth and Jupiter are in alignment together, and then you have all the other planets effectively in a line, excluding Uranus and Pluto, which are in a trine to each other. Very critical planetary geometry. I expect that to trigger some significant space weather. We're seeing some increased activity already. X-ray flux base load has been increasing, and we have the 10th rotation of a very large coronal hole on the sun, and so it has diminished slightly since its 7th and 8th rotation, but it's still very, very large, now rotating on the Earth facing side of the sun, soon to go geoeffective right around this time range. And today, right now, it is the full moon, so happy full moon everyone. This is kicking off this increased energy wave, you could say. It's going to be really interesting to see how this plays out, because if we do get some very significant solar activity going forward, which looks likely, sunspots are now over 150. They are charging up at this moment in time. That then could be impacting us around late June, and there are some very significant events that could be happening early July, according to a variety of sources. Take all that with a huge grain of salt. There's a live stream that I did on that July 5th in the video description. You can check that out if you want. But everything seems to be lining up for some significant activity end of the month and then going into the beginning of July. Let's dive right in. Here we have our latest CCOR1 coronagraph imagery going from June 8th to today, the 11th, and check out that massive double coronal mass ejection there. And let's pause and talk about that for a moment, because this is what's expected to give us some space weather tomorrow, June 12th through maybe the 13th, a slight coronal mass ejection impact, though I'm not convinced. Some space weather forecasters have made that assessment though. So this one here was clearly launched from the south pole of the sun and basically went down. No one's expecting that to hit us. I mean, there may be some edge effects, but I don't think so. Up top is the coronal mass ejection that some space weather forecasters attributed to something occurring on the Earth-facing side, though when I examined the solar imagery, I didn't find anything for that. So it appears to me to be something that launched from the far side, and that would make sense because as I hit play, you'll notice that we start to get a stream of these ejections going out here. That's from this new active region that's soon to appear on the eastern limb of the sun and then be on the Earth facing side. And so I think that it launched a big coronal mass ejection out and then continued to be unstable and just basically started spitting fire like this, sending all these plasma waves out. So we may or may not have a subtle space weather impact tomorrow, June 12th through the 13th. I don't think we have anything super significant coming in from this, but there is some disagreement there. So if you're very sensitive to this stuff, you may want to take some precautions. In general, it's always good to be outside, earthing, grounding as much as possible. We are getting close to summer solstice, another one of these energy waves that we are riding right now. So especially in the northern hemisphere, there's more and more light that's altering our circadian rhythms, right? Producing more cortisol, reducing melatonin, just creating more wakefulness, alertness. So be mindful of that, especially paired with the full moon today. Basically, there's 24/7 light in our environment, which keeps us very conscious and aware. So that's a blessing if you know how to use that. This active region though, that is spitting fire like this, that is soon to be on the Earth facing side. And if it continues to do these sort of ejections, then we could have a whole slew of plasma shot our way. We'll just have to wait and see what this sunspot group looks like, how active it remains. But at this moment in time, it is very active. It's actually launching most of that to Mars. Let's check out our planetary geometry. Here we have our application solar system scope, which allows us to see the planets and their angles between each other, so the relative geometry throughout the solar system, and also the scaling of the planets away from the sun, their astronomical unit distance, all to scale, though the size of these celestial bodies is not to scale. So this is just made a little bit easier to see them. If they were put to scale, it'd be very, very difficult. But I'm going to turn myself off so you can see what I'm saying really nicely, and we'll see the mouse cursor here, so give that a watch. But this is set for today, and the first thing you'll notice is that we do have this alignment forming between Neptune and Saturn. That will go exact February of 2026, but they are nearly conjunct July of 2025. So this planetary geometry is active for the next 18 months. It's already been active. But we also see right now Ceres, the dwarf planet, though it's underneath the ecliptic plane, fairly in line with that, as is Venus and soon Mercury and Mars. Because if I zoom forward here, you see that we get this alignment between all these different planets right there. That is around the very end of June. That is very, very significant. And right now on June 11th, this is where we are. We are nearly opposite to Jupiter. So we have Jupiter opposition coming up. That really clicks in around the 25th of June. But if we go back to around the 21st, you'll notice that we have this nice Mars-Mercury Sun alignment right there. And this is important because, again, if we go back to the current time right now, around June 11th, and actually even a few days before that, which would be like June 8th, June 9th, you'll see that Mars is roughly in the position to have taken a lot of those coronal mass ejection impacts, and they are still streaming into the planet. And so we know that when a coronal mass ejection impacts Mars, it generates a local magnetosphere and an ionosphere, and basically charges up the planet. It doesn't have an internal geodynamo anymore, so it's really only woken up when it is fed solar plasma in this way. But the fact that it's going to be hit with all this plasma right around the time that then Mercury swings in and forms this alignment with it, that is, I think, quite significant. And then shortly afterwards, we see this line form between all these planets: Mars, Mercury, Venus, Ceres, Saturn, and Neptune, with Jupiter, the big plasma heavyweight, on the other side directly from Earth, which seems to be in the open position for this alignment, and even like a dish, you could say, like a radio dish. So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens from this. My intuition is telling me that we have some significant solar activity on the way as a result of this alignment. It's quite striking, the fact that we have a kite and a grand cross and a grand trine active on June 21st. And then if we zoom out, we will also see that Pluto and Uranus are in a trine at this moment in time. So though they're not participating directly in this geometry that I just outlined, they are active in a harmonic arrangement, which has been identified to amplify these sort of effects. This is the planetary geometry that's active. We're starting to see now the beginning ramp up in space weather activity. I expect that to continue all the way through the end of June. And here we have our latest 211 angstrom imagery going from June 8th all the way to today, the 11th. So we can see the 10th rotation of this very large coronal hole. It is not yet fully on the Earth facing side of the sun right now, but you can see it's already quite large, and there's more definitely still rotating into view. So a coronal hole is an area in the solar corona, the outermost atmosphere, where there's a very low plasma density. Effectively, everything has been vacuumed up and put in other locations. It may condense into a plasma filament. We saw that dynamic play out really nicely not that long ago, where we had this plasma filament and then it broke and then a new one formed, and all of a sudden that created a coronal hole. So really interesting electromagnetic dynamics on the sun. But this will be in the geoeffective position around the time of this critical planetary geometry in about a week or so, maybe a little bit less because it is stretching, and it even has a little bit of a transequatorial component right there. So that makes it more likely to interact with the Earth with its high-speed stream, because in addition to have a low plasma density, it has an open magnetic field that streams out into interplanetary space, and that emits these highly charged and high velocity particles out along those magnetic field lines. This is a positive polarity coronal hole, and it has given us some geomagnetic activity as a result of its recurrent rotations around the sun, but it's not a negative polarity, so it doesn't have the best connection to Earth, but we have seen a G2 storm from that before, G1 storm, so it's likely to give us some geomagnetic activity once more. The interesting thing about this is that that magnetic field gives the sun a direct connection to Earth, which is quite close to the sun at 1 astronomical unit. And then you have all these other planets going out, to Neptune in that alignment. So Mars going from 1.5 AU, then to Mercury, really close to the sun, and then you have Venus, Ceres, Saturn, Neptune at 30 AU. They'll all be aligned along that gravitational vector, and plasma has mass. Let's not forget that. The electromagnetic force is very strong, but that does not mean that the gravitational force is completely unimportant anymore. So there will be a bit of a flow of plasma along that gravitational vector due to its mass, and that could explain some of these dynamics as it relates to planetary geometry and then solar activity and space weather and geomagnetic disturbances here on Earth. Another thing to keep in mind that we see really clearly here is there's this big plasma filament that is stretching across the sun at this moment in time. See that right there? And so these plasma filaments are really interesting because when you have a very strong electric field, it will condense plasma into a filament. And the other thing that exists at the same time as this filament are what's known as magnetic ropes. And we see that different elements have different ionization requirements because some elements are heavier, so they're a little bit harder to ionize, for example, iron. And so when you have the strong electric field and you get these plasma filaments to condense, you also have the different elements form different shells. And so they form these magnetic ropes, which have differentiation of the elements contained within them. And so we have this connection going from these this zone here, and especially this coronal hole. We see that, actually, let me pause that at the very end of the video here, okay? We see this plasma filament going and connecting to this coronal hole, and it's stretching all the way to the far side of the sun. So this could explain how, if there is a planetary geometry, Mercury being very close to the sun interacts with one part of the sun, perhaps then we have this energy flow and disturbance actually be able to move across a large portion of the sun, go somewhere else, and then trigger an effect there. So these are some of the dynamics that exist. It doesn't have to necessarily go through the solid body of the sun. Going along the circumference is a little bit more distance overall, but it's not impossible. And these are effectively energy highways. The electric fields and the electric currents and the magnetic fields are running parallel to each other. And so we can see disturbances perhaps from the far side ripple to the Earth-facing side, triggering these sort of explosions or just filament launches or whatever that can trigger significant space weather, and that can happen pretty dynamically, as we've seen many, many, many times on the sun. So this is one of the very important dynamics that's at play right now, and it's going to be getting more and more important as this coronal hole goes into that Earth-facing geoeffective position. Again, that magnetic field streaming directly out. So it looks like all the planets are going to be connected together gravitationally and electromagnetically around the mid to end of June. And so it looks like, and my intuition is telling me, that we have some significant solar activity on the way as a result of that. And it hasn't materialized yet, but I think that's very likely to occur. I could be wrong. Nothing could happen. We'll just have to wait and see. But as someone who's presenting space weather information for you, that is my official forecast for the rest of June. And here we have our past 2 days of intensitygram data for the Earth-facing side of the sun. On the left, this is showing us the sunspots on the sun. And on the right, we see our daily sunspot count. Notice how our sunspot number has jumped up basically to 150 after being in a bit of a holding pattern around 100. So the estimated sunspot count so far for June is now at 100, which is certainly an increase over the value that we had for May, which was 79. Very, very low. And we see the growth of a lot of new sunspots on the Earth-facing side of the sun right now. So especially those that are approaching the western limb, that right side of the sun, they are growing really, really quickly. And we see new sunspots that have rotated in on the eastern limb of the sun, that's to the left. So sunspot numbers are climbing rapidly, and that's another sign that we have increasing solar activity soon on the way. And some more evidence of that is the fact that our baseload X-ray flux is increasing. So we see that we had this kind of bottoming out in X-ray flux from the sun, one of the most vibrational wavelengths of light. The sun emits a lot of X-rays, especially from these solar flares, these explosions on the sun. Very rarely does it release more vibrational light, which would be gamma rays. That's only from the biggest solar flares. So we don't see gamma ray emissions from the sun all that often, but X-rays we track very, very closely. We see that the overall baseline has been increasing, and that's usually a pretty important component as it relates to the overall strength of a solar flare and the potential for really strong solar flares. So during solar minimum, this drops like 3 orders of magnitude, goes way, way, way down because you get these X-rays mainly produced from sunspots, which are very active magnetically and electrically. So we see that we're starting to increase again. No M-class flares for a while, all in the C-class range, but that baseline is going up. And if I zoom out, we can kind of put this into context with some of our recent activity. So we see that we've had periods where the baseline is higher. Here we see that long duration 8.2, which gave us that G4 storm, and then a lot of G3 storming and G2 storming afterwards. And then we can go back. We see that at times we had also baselines that were quite low for the X-ray flux. This is solar maximum. So in general, there is a baseline that's quite high compared to solar minimum. We see these fluctuations here, solar maximum, solar minimum, solar maximum, solar minimum. You see the dates right there. You can also see that we have been kind of coming down in general. This is going all the way back to October of 2024. That's also when we had some big solar activity and a G4 storm, nearly G5. So we can see that we've been on a downtrend. But just in terms of this most recent time zone right there, we do see that we have been increasing. And so it'll be interesting to see how that continues because this has been going up and sunspot numbers are going up. And so I expect that to continue as we move into the rest of June. And then on top of that baseline of X-ray flux, we're more likely to have significant solar flares. This would be M-class flares and perhaps even X-class flares. And we've been tracking cosmic rays here on the channel because we had the largest forebush decrease in about 2 decades as a result of that long duration 8.2 solar flare and that coronal mass ejection that then hit us, that really big geomagnetic storm. That was a big geomagnetic storm. The only reason it wasn't a G5 is because the field flipped northward, which means that it didn't connect nicely to Earth's magnetic field in general. So we see our cosmic ray flux here across time. We see the solar cycle modulation of cosmic ray flux. We're using a neutron proxy to measure this. This right here would be solar maximum. This is solar minimum. Cosmic ray flux is highest during solar minimum. And actually going to our data in 1965, we see that we've been in general ascending upwards and receiving more galactic cosmic rays, though solar cycle 25 has dropped that down precipitously. So we see this massive drop, about negative 16%. We've finally gone back to where we were before it. And so it seems that the effect of that solar storm and the magnetic field and the plasma of it sweeping by the Earth, causing these galactic cosmic rays to be redirected around the Earth is finally past. But we could get another significant drop in cosmic rays if we get new solar storms that come in. One other thing to note is because we are approaching solstice, that in general is not a good time for connection between the solar wind and a solar storm and Earth's magnetic field. You have the strongest connection during the equinoxes due to a variety of things like the Russell-McLaren effect, the equinoctial effect, and others. So during solstice, any solar storm that comes in generally is blunted a little bit in its strength, though it depends on the magnetic field characteristic. So that's important to keep in mind as well with this forecast for the rest of June as it relates to solar activity. Here we have our latest models showing what's been happening energetically with Earth's radiation belts, these shells of extremely energized relativistic ions that surround our planet. Earth's magnetic field acts as a particle accelerator. So these particles can get trapped and then get accelerated in this magnetic vortex, you could say. And sometimes the flux of these ions is higher because there's more of them and they're traveling closer to the speed of light, higher, more relativistic speeds. Other times the flux is low. And so we see low flux with these cool colors, blue, even into teal. Then we see high flux with the orange and the red. So this goes back to June 4th, and we'll see that the radiation belts started to charge up and actually got to a fairly high density and high flux, but then we did have that third solar storm impact, which dropped them down right there. They're starting to recharge. One important note to point out as it relates to the impact on June 1st through the 2nd of that really big solar storm is that a solar storm impact of that scale will often cause large-scale reorganizations of the radiation belts for the weeks and months following it. We saw that with the G5 storm last May in 2024. It created 4 radiation belts that lasted for more than 8 weeks afterwards. And then we also likely had a similar dynamic, though not as significant, for what happened in October of 2024. And the same dynamic is likely in play right now. And so these models are a little bit more simplistic in that they just in general have like a 2 radiation belt structure. But I'm sure with some time, if you start crunching the data, we'll be able to look back and see that we had actually a different radiation belt structure than was precisely shown with this model. So our radiation belts are definitely in a unique state at this moment in time as a result of that most recent G4 storm impact. And that's going to carry through very likely all the way through the end of June. So we've received a lot of solar plasma. We just had this third solar storm impact, which dropped them, but now they're recharging once again. And that means that if we do get some future solar storm impacts over the next couple weeks, we are going to be charged up and ready to go. We have a new active region soon rotating on the Earth-facing side of the sun. We have that big coronal hole back for a 10th rotation, and we have critical planetary geometry active for the rest of June. It really clicks into place around June 21st, but as I showed, it also extends out to the end of June. So here we have that planetary geometry. This is a heliocentric chart with sidereal constellations. So this is in general accurate to the true sky position. The sun would be at the center there. So if you're wondering how to read this, but basically we're just interested in these angles and the geometries here. And we see that we have this grand cross active at this moment in time between all these planets. This is the Earth and the Moon right there. This is Mercury and Mars right there. There's Jupiter. And then here we have Neptune, Saturn, and Ceres. And then we also have this grand trine that's active right there with Pluto, Mercury, Mars once more, and Uranus and Sedna. I have some really interesting revelations I've had about Sedna and the importance of her swinging into perihelion around 2076. I'll share that with a future video. Make sure you subscribe to catch that. But as time goes on, Venus is also going to enter into the mix and join in on this grand cross, which will still basically be active end of June. So this is when things really start getting exciting. We also see this kite configuration right here between Pluto, the gas giant Saturn, Neptune, and also Ceres and Uranus there with Mercury and Mars. And Mercury is said to be the activator of these sort of planetary geometries because of its high orbital velocity swinging in. And so Mars will just have been charged up with a whole bunch of solar plasma. I don't know how much of it's going to be able to hold on to, but regardless, that Mercury sweeps in and perhaps it creates this plasma conveyor belt even going all the way out to the outer gas giants, or at least maybe there's some new plasma flow that exists or creates instabilities gravitationally on the sun, which then could launch something towards Earth. Maybe it launches in another direction, but we have Jupiter there in opposition on the other side. And so it looks like Earth is going to be on the fiery line. We'll just have to wait and see. But this is the forecast that we have. I think that's also going to go to the end of June. And this is all happening on solstice. And so if we do get some big space weather impacts around this time, going through the end of June, then it'll be really interesting to see how the Earth uses in response to energy, because we often see heightened earthquake activity and heightened volcanic activity before, like very slightly before, during, and especially after big solar storm impacts. And that will take us through the beginning of July, which a lot of people are talking about July 5th for there being some very large volcanic event. Take all that with a huge grain of salt, but it's interesting to consider. So that's been your forecast. Thank you all so much for watching. Again, I've been your host, Stefan Burns, wishing all of you well. Please subscribe to the channel if you have not done so already. We are on the road to 500,000 subscribers. The channel's been blowing up like crazy. A lot of you are not subscribed, and so if you watch the channel often, just smash that subscribe button, and while you're at it, smash that like button, help this channel grow. And a reminder once more is that I will be at Cosmic Summit, which is this solstice, so it's rapidly approaching. If you're on the East Coast and you want to meet me and also listen to a variety of wonderful speakers like Randall Carlson and Robert Schock and more, then you can pick up tickets. You can use the code Stefan Burns, all one word, to get 10% off admission. And so I'll be there with a big booth. We'll have all the different products like the herbal tea blends and the earthing sandals and more merch that is soon to be released on the website. So you can visit us at Cosmic Summit and meet me face to face. It's going to be a great time. I'm hoping to meet a lot of you there. And if you're not able to make it to Greensboro, North Carolina and Cosmic Summit, a lot of this stuff is already on the website and soon to be released on the website, wildfreeorganic.com, so you can pick up some wonderful all organic herbal tea blends there, earthing shoes, sandals, and boots, and more. And that all supports the growth of this channel. Help me help you. So thank you all so much. Wishing all of you well. Have a great day, and I'll see you all in the next video.